The story of karma begins in the oldest Indian poems that people still read today. The Rig Veda, a collection of hymns that scholars date to about 1500 BCE, already hints at a rule of cause and effect. One verse says that the deeds one does are like seeds that grow into fruit. In plain language, the hymn suggests that good actions bring good results, while bad actions bring bad results. The idea is not yet called karma, but the seed and fruit image plants the first root of the later doctrine. A few centuries later, the later Vedic books called the Upanishads sharpen the picture. The Chandogya Upanishad tells a story of a boy who gives his friend a bowl of water. The friend later saves the boy from a flood. The text explains that the boy's kindness was the reason for the rescue. The Upanishad uses the word karmic to describe this link, though the exact term kamma appears only in later writings. The Upanishadic view ties the law of cause and effect to the inner self, saying that the soul carries the weight of deeds across many lives. When Buddhism arose in the 5th century BCE, it took the seed of cause and effect and made it a central teaching. The earliest Buddhist sutras, such as the Dhammapada, repeat the line, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought." The Buddha himself is recorded as saying, "What we do today, we will become tomorrow." In the Pali Canon, the word kamma appears many times, and it is defined as intentional action that shapes future experience. The Buddha taught that not only big deeds, but even small thoughts plant seeds that will sprout later. A simple modern picture helps to see how this works. Imagine a person who helps a neighbor carry groceries up a set of stairs. The neighbor later sees a chance to thank the helper with a smile or a small gift. The smile is not a magical reward, but a natural response that flows from the earlier kindness. In the same way, a person who says something harsh may later find a stranger turning away in anger. The cause and effect pattern is clear in everyday life, and the ancient texts use the same pattern to explain larger moral cycles. Another everyday example shows the same idea. A child shares a snack with a classmate who looks hungry. The next day, the classmate offers to share a favorite book. The sharing creates a loop of goodwill. The ancient sages would call this loop kamma, in the sense that the first act set a path that led back to the giver. The story is simple, but it mirrors the deeper claim that all actions leave a trace that shapes future moments. The earliest written law code in India, the Manusmriti, also mentions a kind of karmic balance. The law of Manu, dated to around the 2nd century BCE, states that one man who harms another shall suffer the same harm in his own life. The text frames this as a social rule, but it also reflects the belief that moral balance is built into the world. The law of Manu uses the term pratyahara, meaning return, to describe how deeds return to the doer. This legal language shows that the idea of karmic return was already part of public life, not just a private meditation. One of the most famous stories about the power of karma comes from the life of the monk Mahakasyapa. According to the early Buddhist chronicles, Mahakasyapa once sat beside a hungry beggar on a cold night. He gave the beggar his own blanket and a piece of rice. Years later, when Mahakasyapa was traveling, he was caught in a sudden storm. A stranger offered him shelter in a small hut, and the stranger turned out to be the same beggar, now a prosperous merchant. The story is told to illustrate how a single act of generosity can return many times over. The tale appears in the Vinaya Pitaka, the Buddhist text that records monastic rules and stories, and it is quoted often in later commentaries. Another anecdote from the Vedic world involves a king who ignored a poor farmer's plea for water during a drought. The farmer prayed to the gods, and later the king's own fields dried up, leaving him with no harvest. The story is recorded in the Yajurveda as a warning that neglecting the poor invites a reversal of fortune. The narrative links the king's neglect to a later loss, reinforcing the idea that actions do not stay hidden. Even with these powerful stories, not everyone in ancient India accepted the karmic law without question. Some early skeptics, recorded in the Charvaka tradition, called the idea of karma a superstition. The Charvaka philosophers argued that the world works through material cause and effect, not moral cause and effect. They said that a good deed does not guarantee a good result, and a bad deed does not guarantee a bad result. One Charvaka text, now lost but quoted by later writers, claimed, "If karma were real, why do honest men die early while thieves live long?" The skeptics used real-world observations to challenge the moral law. Another early critic came from the Jain tradition, which shared many ideas with Buddhism, but also questioned the Buddhist version of karma. The Jain author Kundakunda wrote that the Buddhist notion of karma was too vague. He argued that the Buddhist list of karmic results was inconsistent, pointing out cases where people performed great charity yet suffered early death. He wrote, "A man who gives away his wealth and still meets a sudden end cannot be said to have earned a good result." This critique pushed Buddhist thinkers to refine their explanations, adding more detail about the role of intention and the timing of results. Both the Charvaka and Jain critiques forced Buddhist scholars to sharpen their arguments. The Buddha's followers responded by emphasizing intention, called satana, as the key factor. They said that an act done with a pure heart plants a positive seed, while an act done with greed plants a negative seed. This refinement helped address the skeptics' examples, because the critics had not considered the inner motive. The Buddhist text Mahasa Sipaso records the reply, "It is not the act alone, but the mind behind it that determines the fruit." The idea of karma also appears in the early Buddhist story of the 5 ascetics who first heard the Buddha's teaching. Each ascetic had a different background. One was a rich merchant, another a farmer, a third a soldier, a fourth a thief, and the fifth a scholar. The Buddha told them that each would experience the results of their past deeds, but that they could also change the pattern by cultivating right thought. The story shows how the early Buddhist community linked personal history, moral choice, and future outcome. Later sections of this video will return to the theme of moral responsibility. The notion that each person carries the weight of their deeds means that every choice matters. When the discussion moves to modern ethics, the same principle will be used to ask whether people can be held accountable for actions that were shaped by past lives or social conditions. The thread of responsibility runs through the whole story of karma. In modern times, the word karma has become popular in everyday speech. People say good karma when they hope a kind act will bring a good turn, and raw bad karma when they warn that a selfish move will backfire. This casual use still reflects the ancient seed and fruit image. Yet scholars remind viewers that the original teachings were more complex. The early texts warned that karma is not a simple tally system. It is a web of causes that includes intention, timing, and the larger social context. A modern analogy can help clarify this. Think of a pond where a stone is dropped. The stone creates ripples that travel outward. Each ripple touches other stones, creating new ripples. A single act of kindness is like dropping a stone that sends out gentle ripples, eventually reaching distant shores. A harmful act is like dropping a heavy rock that creates harsh waves that can break the pond's surface. The analogy shows that the effect spreads, but the shape of the pond and the other stones determine how the ripples behave. In the same way, karma works within the shape of a person's mind and the society around them. Another analogy uses a garden. Planting a seed of compassion is like sowing a flower that will bloom and attract pollinators. Planting a seed of anger is like sowing a weed that spreads and chokes other plants. The gardener must tend the soil, water the plants, and remove the weeds. The ancient texts compare the mind to a garden, saying that thoughts are seeds, and the quality of the harvest depends on how the mind is cared for. This garden image appears in the Bhagavad Gita, where a warrior asks how to act without attachment, and the text replies that one must plant the seed of selfless action. The early Buddhist sutras also give a vivid picture of karmic balance. In the Sutra of the 10 Grounds, the Buddha says that a person who gives freely without thought of reward will see the fruit of his deeds as a bright moon in the night sky. The moon image appears in many Vedic verses, linking light and goodness. The quote from the Dhammapada, "By deeds one becomes," is repeated often in the video to remind viewers that actions shape identity. The law of Manu adds a social dimension. It says that a ruler who punishes the innocent will lose his throne as the wind takes away a leaf. The metaphor of the wind shows that power is fragile when moral law is ignored. This ancient warning still feels relevant when modern leaders are held to account for corruption. When the story of Mahakasyapa is told, the narrator can hear the rain on the roof of the small hut where the monk first gave his blanket. The monk's simple act of sharing warmth becomes a lesson that the world remembers. The story ends with Mahakasyapa smiling at the stranger, realizing that the smile was a return of his own kindness. The tale is recorded in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, and the quote, "Compassion is its own reward," is often cited from that text. The farmer king anecdote from the Yajur Veda also carries a clear moral. The king's fields wither, and he learns that ignoring the needy invites loss. The text says, "Who neglects the poor invites the drought of his own heart." This line, though simple, captures the idea that moral neglect can bring physical hardship. Both anecdotes illustrate how ancient writers used concrete stories to teach the abstract law of cause and effect. They did not rely on abstract reasoning alone. They showed people how the principle works in daily life. The video will later return to these stories when discussing how modern societies can build policies that reflect karmic insight, such as social safety nets that reward generosity. The skeptics' arguments also deserve attention. The Charvaka critique that the rich die young while the poor live long points to statistical outliers that seem to break the rule. Modern readers can see that such cases exist, but Buddhist scholars respond by noting that karma can manifest over many lifetimes, not just within one span. This longer view helps explain why some good people suffer and some bad people thrive. The Jain critique about charity without result pushes the tradition to stress inner purity. The Buddhist reply that intention is the seed shows how the system adapts to criticism. In the next part of the video, the discussion will shift to how karma influences moral responsibility in contemporary ethics. The ancient claim that each act leaves a trace leads to questions about blame and praise. If a person's actions are shaped by past deeds, can they be fully responsible for what they do now? The answer, as the early texts suggest, is that awareness of intention can change the pattern. By cultivating mindful intention, a person can plant new, positive seeds even if past seeds were bitter. To sum up, the origins of karma trace a line from the earliest Vedic hymns, through the Upanishads, into the Buddhist sutras, and into the law codes of ancient India. The idea grew from a simple seed and fruit image into a complex system that includes intention, timing, and social context. Stories like the monk Mahakasyapa's blanket and the king's drought make the principle vivid. Skeptics, such as the Charvaka and Jain thinkers, forced the doctrine to become more precise. The ancient teachings still speak to modern life, showing that each small act, like helping a neighbor or sharing a smile, can set a ripple that returns in unexpected ways. The video will later explore how this ancient law of cause and effect shapes our modern sense of moral responsibility. Karma is often described as a rule of cause and effect that works like planting a seed and watching it grow. When a seed is placed in good soil, watered, and given sunlight, it will sprout and become a plant. In the same way, a kind act or a thoughtful effort can bring about a positive result later on. The idea that every action carries a future result has deep roots in many ancient traditions. The word itself comes from the Sanskrit root vut-ko, which means to do or to make. In the oldest texts of India, the concept appears in the Rig Veda, where it is linked to the idea that deeds shape destiny. Later, the Upanishads speak of kamma as a law that moves the soul forward. In Buddhism, the Buddha taught that intentional actions are the cause of future experience. In Jainism, the founder Mahavira said that every act, good or bad, leaves a mark on the soul. These early thinkers all saw karma as a natural order, not as a punishment from a god, but as a pattern that repeats itself. The early Indian sages were not the only ones to think about cause and effect. In the West, the Greek philosopher Epicurus wrote about law of sown and reaped, noting that people who act wisely tend to enjoy the benefits of their choices. The Roman Stoics, especially Seneca, taught that the universe is a chain of causes. Although they used different words, the underlying idea matches the karma principle. In modern times, philosophers such as Thomas Nagel and Derek Parfit have talked about moral responsibility in ways that echo the ancient view that actions have long consequences. Even psychologists refer to the principle of reinforcement, which says that behavior that is rewarded is likely to be repeated. All of these perspectives point to a common belief. What a person does today shapes what happens tomorrow. One clear example of karma in everyday life is the habit of studying hard before a test. When a student spends time reviewing notes, solving practice problems, and asking questions, the effort creates a mental seed. The brain absorbs the information, builds connections, and later, when the test arrives, the knowledge blooms into a good grade. The cause, studying, produces the effect, success. The same pattern shows up in the simple act of recycling. When a person separates plastic, paper, and metal from trash, the action supports a system that turns waste into new material. Over time, the community sees cleaner streets, fewer landfills, and a healthier environment. The effort to recycle plants a seed of sustainability that later yields a better world. Stories from history illustrate the karma idea in vivid ways. One ancient tale tells of a farmer who lived in a region hit by a long drought. When the grain stores were low, the farmer chose to share a small portion of his remaining seed with a neighboring family. The neighbor's field, though modest, produced enough grain to feed both families through the worst months. When the rains finally returned, the farmer's own field flourished, yielding a bumper crop that more than covered the loss of the seed he had given away. The story is often quoted in the Mahabharata as a lesson that generosity returns in abundance. A second legend speaks of a merchant who built his wealth by cheating customers and overcharging for goods. He hoarded his riches on a large ship, confident that his cleverness would keep him safe. One night a storm struck, and the ship sank, taking his treasure to the deep. The merchant's loss is recorded in the Jataka tales as a warning that deceit leads to ruin. Both anecdotes serve as vivid reminders that good deeds can grow into blessings, while bad deeds can bring loss. The principle of karma also appears in modern scientific thinking, though under different names. Behavioral economics studies how incentives shape choices. When a company rewards employees for teamwork, the reward acts like fertile soil, encouraging more collaboration. When a city imposes fines for littering, the penalty discourages wasteful habits. In each case, the cause, reward, or punishment creates an effect that aligns with the karma view of cause and effect. Some neuroscientists talk about neural plasticity, the brain's ability to change in response to experience. Learning a new skill rewires connections, making the skill easier to use later. This scientific language describes the same pattern that ancient philosophers called karma. Even with all this support, some people argue that luck, not karma, decides what happens. One critic says that a student who studies hard may still fail because the exam is unfair or the teacher is biased. In this view, chance, not effort, controls the outcome. Another opponent claims that a person who recycles may still live in a polluted city because industrial policies, not personal habits, drive the environment. These counterarguments stress that external forces can overwhelm individual actions. They suggest that the world is too complex for a simple cause and effect rule. Supporters of karma respond by pointing out that luck is itself part of the larger web of causes. When a student faces an unfair exam, the unfairness often stems from a decision made by the teacher, who was trained under certain pressures. The student's study habit still improves knowledge, even if the grade does not reflect it. Over time, the knowledge can lead to other opportunities, such as a scholarship or a job, showing that the original effort was not wasted. In the recycling example, the individual's habit may not change citywide pollution overnight, but it adds pressure on policymakers. When many people recycle, the demand for recycled material grows, prompting factories to invest in cleaner processes. In this sense, personal actions are seeds that grow into larger change, even if the first harvest is small. The link between karma and ethical choices is clear. When a person decides to help a stranger, that choice plants a seed of kindness. When the stranger later faces a hard decision, the memory of that help may inspire them to act compassionately toward another. The ripple effect shows how one moral act can spread through many lives. In the earlier section on ethical choices, the idea was that each decision carries weight. Karma adds the dimension that the weight can be felt later, not just in the moment. Ancient texts give direct quotes that capture the spirit of this law. The Buddha said, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought." This short line ties thought, action, and result together in a simple way. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna, "You are what your deeds have made you." The phrase reminds listeners that identity is built by actions. The Jain text Acharanga Sutra states, Every act leaves a mark. The soul carries it forward." Each of these quotes uses plain language to explain that deeds are not isolated events but part of a chain. Modern thinkers also put the idea into everyday language. The psychologist Carol Dweck writes, "Effort is the engine that drives growth." Though she does not use the word karma, the sentiment matches the seed analogy. The environmental writer Bill McKibben notes, "Small acts of care add up to big change." Again, the pattern of cause leading to effect appears. These contemporary voices show that the ancient principle still resonates. To see karma at work, imagine a student named Maya who decides to review her notes each night. The habit creates a mental garden. Over weeks, the knowledge deepens, and when a surprise quiz arrives, Maya answers confidently. Her grade rises, and the teacher notices her progress. The teacher then offers Maya a role as a peer tutor, giving her more experience. Maya's original effort has grown into a series of benefits, each one a new sprout from the first seed. Consider another everyday scene. A neighbor named Luis chooses to separate his waste into recyclables and trash. The local recycling center receives more clean material, which lowers the cost of processing. The city council, seeing the increased volume, decides to invest in more recycling bins across the neighborhood. Over months, the streets look cleaner, and the community enjoys lower waste fees. Luis' simple habit has helped create a larger system that benefits many. The cause? Recycling. produces an effect that spreads outward. Historical anecdotes reinforce these patterns. The farmer who shared grain during famine is remembered not only for his generosity, but also for the later bounty his fields enjoyed. The story is told in many villages as a lesson that giving can bring back more than one expects. The merchant who cheated and lost his ship is a cautionary tale that appears in trade guild records. The loss of the ship is described as a direct result of the merchant's dishonesty, teaching apprentices that integrity protects wealth. Even in modern business, the karma idea appears. A company that treats its workers well often sees higher productivity and lower turnover. The good treatment acts like fertile soil, encouraging loyalty. Conversely, a firm that cuts corners on safety may save money today, but face accidents that shut down production and damage reputation. The short-term gain is outweighed by the later loss, echoing the ancient warning that harmful deeds bring harm. Critics who point to luck may bring up stories of famous athletes who train hard yet lose due to an injury. The response is that the training still built skill and discipline, which can help the athlete recover and succeed later. Luck may change the timing, but the underlying cause, hard work, remains valuable. Similarly, a person who recycles may still live in a polluted area because factories emit toxins. Yet the person's habit adds pressure for change, and over time, regulations may improve air quality. The cause may not instantly fix the problem, but it sets the stage for future improvement. In modern philosophy, the term moral causation is used to describe this idea. It means that moral actions create future conditions that affect the moral agent. The concept appears in the work of philosophers like Susan Wolfe, who writes that raw deeds shape the kind of world we live in. The language is simple enough for a broad audience, yet it captures the same seed and growth image. The principle of karma also connects to the idea of responsibility. When a person realizes that their actions will have later effects, they may think more carefully before acting. This mindfulness is a core practice in many meditation traditions. The Buddha taught that raw mindfulness of action leads to clear results. By paying attention to each step, a person can plant seeds that grow into the life they want. The story of the farmer also shows how community can amplify karma. When the farmer shared grain, the neighbor's family was able to survive, and later they helped the farmer during a flood. The initial act created a network of support that returned in a different form. This shows that karma is not always a straight line. It can loop back through many people. The merchant's loss, on the other hand, spread fear among other traders, prompting them to adopt honest practices to avoid similar fate. The ripple effect works both ways. In everyday life, the seed analogy can be used to explain why small habits matter. Plant a tiny seed of gratitude each morning by noting 3 things one is thankful for. Over weeks, the habit can grow into a more positive outlook, affecting relationships and work performance. The cause, gratitude, produces the effect, happiness. The same pattern appears in physical health. Choosing to walk a few blocks each day plants a seed of fitness. Over months, the body becomes stronger, and the risk of illness drops. The cause leads to a healthier effect. Modern science also talks about feedback loops, where an outcome feeds back into the system and changes future behavior. This is essentially a modern way of describing karma. When a student receives a good grade, the confidence boost encourages more study, leading to more success. When a person sees that recycling reduces waste, the visible result encourages more recycling. The loop shows how cause and effect reinforce each other. The concept of karma is not limited to personal actions. Large societies also experience cause and effect cycles. A country that invests in education plants a seed of knowledge that can lead to economic growth, innovation, and social stability. A nation that ignores human rights may sow unrest that later erupts into conflict. These macro examples echo the same principle seen in the farmer's grain and the merchant's ship. Quotes from primary sources continue to illustrate the point. In the Dhammapada, a Buddhist collection of sayings, it is written, "As a seed grows into a tree, so does a deed grow into its result." The language is plain, making the idea easy to grasp. In the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the text says, "Actions performed with awareness create clear outcomes." Both statements reinforce the seed metaphor without using complex jargon. The modern world offers many new examples of karma-like cause, and the story of karma often feels like a quiet river that runs through many lives. It carries ideas about what a person does, why a person does it, and what later happens because of those deeds. In this part of the video, the focus is on the clash between moral intent and the results that follow. The question is simple. Does the heart behind an action matter more than the effect that the action creates? The answer is not simple, and many thinkers have tried to sort it out. The idea that intention matters can be traced back to ancient India. The earliest texts that talk about karma are the Upanishads, especially the Katha Upanishad, where a wise teacher tells a young seeker that the seed of a thought grows into a deed, and the deed grows into a result. Later, the Bhagavad Gita, a dialogue between the warrior Arjuna and his charioteer Krishna, makes the point clear. Krishna says, "One is not condemned for the act alone, but for the motive behind it." The exact verse reads, "It is not the action, but the intention that determines the moral worth." This line is often quoted when people argue that doing a good thing for selfish reasons is not truly good. Another early source is the Buddhist teaching on right intention. In the Noble Eightfold Path, the first factor is right view, followed by right intention. The Buddha taught that a mind that wishes harm will bring suffering, even if the outward act seems harmless. A short quote from the Dhammapada says, "Mind is the forerunner of all actions. If the mind is pure, the action will be pure." This shows that early Indian thought placed the mind, the intention, at the center of moral evaluation. In the West, the debate appears in the writings of Immanuel Kant. Kant argued that the moral law is based on the will, not on the results. He wrote, "Act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law." For Kant, an action done from duty, even if it leads to a bad outcome, is still morally good. In contrast, the utilitarian philosophers Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill said that the right action is the one that produces the most happiness. They would say that the outcome matters more than the motive. The clash between Kant and utilitarianism is a classic illustration of the intent versus result debate. The modern philosopher Thomas Nagel has added another layer. He says that we can look at an action from a null view from nowhere, a neutral perspective that cares about the total consequences. From that view, the intention of the actor can be set aside. This idea has been used to argue that a well-intended plan that causes a disaster is still bad because the damage is real, no matter how pure the heart was. These different thinkers give a map of the debate. The map has two main routes. One route says that the inner reason, the motive, is the true measure of moral worth. The other route says that the outer effect, the result, is what really counts. Both routes have strong arguments, and both have strong counter-arguments. One clear example helps to see the two sides. Imagine a person who gives a large sum of money to a charity. In the first case, the donor gives the money anonymously, without any name attached. In the second case, the donor makes a public announcement, takes pictures, and asks friends to praise the act. The money reaches the same people in both cases, and the same lives are saved. The result is identical. The only difference is the intention behind the act. The anonymous donor may be motivated by pure compassion, while the public donor may be looking for status. If the moral yardstick is intention, the first donor is better. If the yardstick is result, both donors are equally good. A second example comes from everyday life. A student studies hard for an exam because she truly loves learning. Another student studies just to get a high grade and impress parents. Both earn the same score. The result, a high grade, is the same. The motive differs. The first student may develop a lifelong love of knowledge, while the second may stay focused only on external rewards. Again, the difference lies in the heart behind the effort. These examples show why the debate matters. In many real-world policies, governments ask whether to reward people for good deeds. Some tax systems give a deduction for charitable donations, but only if the donor reports the gift publicly. Critics argue that this encourages people to act for praise rather than pure concern. Others say that the public record helps ensure the money actually reaches those in need, making the outcome more reliable. The story of King Ashoka offers a powerful historical anecdote that blends intent, result, and change. Ashoka was a Mauryan emperor who, early in his reign, led a brutal war against the kingdom of Kalinga. The war caused massive loss of life, and the king watched the suffering of his own people and the conquered. The ancient texts say that Ashoka felt deep remorse. He turned to Buddhism, embraced its teachings on compassion, and began to rule with a new intent, to reduce suffering. He ordered the building of hospitals, planted trees along roads, and sent missionaries to spread the message of non-violence. The result of his conversion was a shift in the empire's policies, and many people benefited. Yet some historians point out that even after his conversion, Ashoka still kept a large army and sometimes used force to keep order. The anecdote raises the question: does a change of heart make the earlier violent actions less bad? Or does the later good work simply add new results without erasing the past harm? The story shows that intent and result can travel together, but also pull in opposite directions. Another classic tale is the parable of the honest woodcutter, a story that appears in Chinese folklore and was recorded by the philosopher Zhuangzi. In the tale, a woodcutter drops his axe into a river. A dragon appears and offers him a golden axe, a silver axe, and finally his own plain axe. The woodcutter refuses the gold and silver, saying they are not his. Impressed by his honesty, the dragon returns his own axe and also gives him the gold and silver as a reward. The moral is that honesty, the pure intention, brings extra benefits, the result. However, a different reading says that the woodcutter's honesty is only valuable because the dragon decides to reward him. If the dragon had not existed, the woodcutter would have been left with nothing. The story can be used to argue that good intent only matters when it leads to a positive outcome. Both anecdotes are useful because they combine a real historical figure and a simple story, showing how the two ideas of intent and result can be tangled. They also provide vivid images that help viewers remember the abstract debate. Now the script moves to the arguments that defend the importance of intention. The first argument is called the purity of motive argument. It says that moral worth is like a seed. If the seed is pure, the tree that grows will be healthy, even if the soil is not perfect. The argument uses the example of a doctor who works long hours in a poor clinic because she truly cares for the sick. Even if the clinic lacks equipment and some patients do not survive, the doctor's motive is still praised because it shows a deep respect for human life. The claim is that a society that values pure motives will encourage more people to act from compassion, which in the long run improves overall well-being. The second argument is the respect for autonomy argument. It says that each person has the right to be seen as a moral agent, not just as a tool for outcomes. If a person is judged only by the results of their actions, the inner life of the person is ignored. This can lead to a culture where people hide their true feelings and pretend to have good motives just to get a good rating. The argument holds that respecting intent protects the dignity of the person who acts. Both arguments have clear support in many traditions. The Buddhist teaching on or right intention is a direct echo of the purity of motive argument. The Kantian focus on duty reflects the respect for autonomy idea. Counter-arguments challenge the focus on intent. The first counter-argument says that outcomes matter more because they affect real people. If a well-meaning leader starts a war believing it will bring peace, but the war kills millions, the leader's good intent does not erase the harm. This view is often called consequentialism, the belief that the moral value of an act is determined by its results. A modern example is the case of a pharmaceutical company that releases a new drug believing it will cure a disease, but the drug later causes severe side effects. The company's intention to help is not enough to excuse the damage caused. The second counter-argument is called the moral luck argument. It says that sometimes people cannot control the results of their actions, yet we still judge them by those results. For instance, a driver who drives carefully but is hit by an unexpected landslide may cause a fatal accident. Even though the driver's intent was safe driving, the outcome is tragic. Critics of the intent-focused view argue that we must hold people accountable for the actual damage, not just the inner thought, because the world cares about what happens, not about private feelings. These counter-arguments push the discussion toward a middle ground. Some philosophers propose a causal factor approach. They suggest that both intent and result should be weighed. The weight may shift depending on the situation. In cases where the outcome is clearly harmful, the result may dominate. In cases where the result is neutral, the intention may become the key factor. Real-world applications of this dual-factor view appear in law. Many legal systems distinguish between mens rea, the guilty mind, and actus reus, the guilty act. A person who accidentally harms another may be found less culpable than a person who intended harm. However, the law also punishes reckless behavior that leads to injury, even if there was no intent to harm. This legal balance shows how societies try to blend intent and result. In the field of medicine, doctors follow the principle of do no harm. They must consider both their intention to heal and the possible side effects of a treatment. A surgeon who operates to save a life but accidentally cuts a vital nerve is still held responsible for the result, even though the intention was good. The medical ethics code reflects a blend of both aspects. Modern interpretations of karma often bring the discussion into the realm of psychology. Researchers in moral psychology have run experiments where participants judge two characters, one who donates money to a cause for selfish reasons, and another who does it anonymously. Most participants rate the anonymous donor higher, showing that ordinary people naturally give weight to intent. Yet other experiments show that when the outcome is large, people may overlook the motive. If a donor's money saves a whole village, the public donor may still be praised despite the self-interest. These findings suggest that the human mind uses a flexible rule that mixes both factors. An analogy that helps to picture the mix is a garden. The gardener's intention is to grow flowers. The soil, water, and sunlight are the conditions that affect the result. If the gardener works with love, but the soil is poisoned, the flowers may not bloom. If the gardener works without love, but the soil is perfect, the flowers may still bloom. The garden's health depends on both the gardener's care and the environment. In moral terms, the gardener's care is the intention, and the soil is the outcome. Another analogy uses a recipe. A chef may follow a recipe with great care, intending to make a tasty dish. If the ingredients are spoiled, the dish will be bad. Conversely, a chef may use bad ingredients but add a secret spice that makes the dish surprisingly good. The taste of the final dish is the result, while the chef's care is the intention. Both matter to the diner's experience. The upcoming section on free will tie into this discussion. If people have the power to choose their intentions, karma is a word that many people hear in stories, in movies, and in everyday talk. It is a word that comes from ancient India, and it means action or deed. The idea is that every action leaves a trace, and that trace will shape what happens later. In this part of the video, the narrator will look at how 4 traditions understand that idea. The traditions are Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and a group of Western mystic teachings that also talk about cause and effect. The narrator will use simple scenes, such as a student helping a classmate and a driver waiting at a crosswalk, to show how the idea works in daily life. The narrator will also tell 2 old stories, give 2 modern objections, and point to the next part about science. The story of karma begins in the Vedic world of ancient India. The earliest verses of the Rig Veda speak of deeds and their results, but the word karma becomes clear in the Upanishads, a set of texts that ask how the self is linked to the world. In the Upanishad known as the Katha Upanishad, a teacher tells a young man, "As a man acts, so he becomes." That line is a short way of saying that deeds shape destiny. Later, the Bhagavad Gita, a dialogue between the Prince Arjuna and the god Krishna, makes the idea more precise. Krishna says, "You have the right to act, but not to the fruits of the act." In simple words, a person should do good because it is right, not because a reward is expected. The Gita also says that the soul moves from one life to another, and that the sum of deeds decides the next birth. This view of karma as a moral ledger that follows a soul through many lives is the core of Hindu thought. Buddhism takes the same word, but gives it a new shape. The Buddha taught that all things are linked by a chain of cause and effect, called pratityasamutpada, or dependent origination. He said that the mind creates the world, and that each intention creates a new knot in the chain. The Buddha's own words in the Dhammapada read, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought." In Buddhist practice, karma is not a cosmic judge, but a natural law that the mind can work with. A Buddhist monk who sees a bird fall into a river may jump in to save it. The story goes that a monk named Mahakashapa saw a small bird caught in a net. He untangled the net, set the bird free, and felt a sudden calm in his heart. The tale ends with the monk hearing a voice from the forest that says, "Your kindness has planted a seed that will bloom in many lives." The story shows that even a small act of compassion plants a future benefit. Jainism pushes the idea of karma even farther. Jain teachers say that every action, even a thought, sticks to the soul like a dust particle. This dust is called karmic matter, and it can be removed only by strict self-discipline. The Jain text Tattvartha Sutra says, "Karma is the cause of birth, death, and all change." Because the dust is physical, Jains practice very careful behavior. They avoid harming even the smallest insects, and they often walk with a soft broom in their hand to sweep away any creature that might be stepped on. In Jain stories, a king named Samprati once ordered his palace to be cleaned every night so that no insect would die. The tale says that his kingdom enjoyed long peace because his deeds kept the karmic dust from clinging to his people. Jain thought shows karma as a literal substance that can be added or removed. Western mystic traditions also talk about a law of cause and effect, though they use different words. In the ancient Greek mystery schools, the poet Hermes Trismegistus wrote, "What you sow, so shall you reap." In the Christian mystic tradition, the medieval writer St. Augustine wrote, "Our deeds are the seeds we plant in the garden of the soul." In modern New Age circles, the phrase, "What goes around, comes around," is often repeated. These sayings echo the same idea that actions have consequences that return to the actor. Though the language is different, the pattern is the same: a moral universe that balances deeds. To see how these ideas work in a simple setting, imagine a student named Maya who sees a classmate struggling with a math problem. Maya offers to help. In a Hindu view, Maya's help adds good karma to her soul, and it may help her in a future life. In a Buddhist view, the intention to help creates a positive mental state that will lead to future happiness, regardless of any reward. In a Jain view, Maya's act is a step toward removing karmic dust, because she acted without harming anyone. In a Western mystic view, Maya's kindness plants a seed that will later grow into goodwill from others. The result is the same. The classmate learns, and Maya feels a quiet joy. The story shows that the same deed can be read through many lenses, each giving it a slightly different meaning. A second everyday example uses a driver named Luis who arrives at a crosswalk just as a child steps onto the road. Luis slows down and lets the child cross safely. In Hindu terms, Luis adds good karma that will support his future. In Buddhist terms, Luis's mindful pause creates a calm mind that will bring future peace. In Jain terms, Luis avoided causing harm, so he kept his karmic dust low. In the Western mystic sense, Luis's act is a ripple that will return as kindness from other drivers. The scene shows how a simple act of restraint can be a living lesson in cause and effect. The Buddhist tale of the monk who saved a bird illustrates how small compassion can echo through many lives. In the story, the monk's act of freeing the bird is followed by a dream in which a golden feather falls into his hand. The feather glows, and the monk wakes feeling a deep sense of connection to all living things. The story ends with the monk telling his disciples, "When we act with love, the world replies in ways we cannot see." The moral is that karma works like a garden. Each good seed grows into a larger plant that shades many. The Hindu story of Sita's exile from the epic Ramayana also shows karma at work. When Sita is forced to leave the palace, she walks into the forest with a calm heart. In the forest, she meets sages who teach her that her suffering is a result of past deeds, but also a chance to grow. The sages say, "Your pain is the fruit of past actions, but your patience is the seed of future peace." Sita's endurance eventually leads to her return and the restoration of her honor. The tale shows that karma can be both a burden and a teacher, shaping a person's path through trials. Jain history offers another anecdote. The founder Mahavira, when he was a prince, left his palace after seeing a dead animal on the road. He vowed never to cause harm again. He spent 12 years in meditation, and his followers say that his strict non-violence cleared the karmic dust from his soul. The story is used to illustrate how a single decision to avoid harm can start a long process of purification. In the Western mystic world, an anecdote from the 12th century mystic Hildegard of Bingen shows a similar pattern. Hildegard wrote in her visions, "When I gave bread to a hungry traveller, the road ahead opened with light." She meant that the act of generosity opened new possibilities for her spiritual journey. The story is often told to show that the universe responds to kindness. All these stories share a pattern. A person does something, the act creates a trace, and later that trace shows up as benefit or lesson. The details differ. Hinduism ties the trace to many lives, Buddhism ties it to mind and rebirth, Jainism ties it to a physical dust, and Western mystics tie it to a moral balance. Yet the core idea is the same. Actions are not isolated events, they are part of a larger flow. Now the narrator will turn to two modern thinkers who do not accept a spiritual explanation for karma. The first is the 18th century philosopher David Hume. Hume argued that we only see a pattern of cause and effect in the world, not a moral law that rewards or punishes. He wrote, "Custom, not moral order, makes us think that good deeds are followed by good results." In Hume's view, when Maya helps her classmate, the good feeling Maya gets is a natural psychological response, not a sign of a cosmic ledger. The second modern critic is the contemporary philosopher and scientist Sam Harris. Harris says, "Well, the word karma is a myth that disguises the real forces of psychology and social reciprocity. He claims that people help others because of empathy and because societies reward cooperation, not because of a hidden moral force." Both Hume and Harris give reasons to doubt a spiritual karma, pointing instead to human nature and social systems. These objections matter because they show that the idea of karma is not accepted by everyone. The narrator will later discuss how modern science looks at cause and effect in the brain. For now, the narrator will keep the focus on the way the four traditions talk about the idea. One modern interpretation comes from psychology. Researchers on moral behavior have found that when people act kindly, they often feel a warm glow, a feeling that encourages them to act again. This is called the warm glow effect. In simple terms, the brain releases chemicals that make a person feel good after a good deed. This can be seen as a natural explanation for why karma feels real, even if there is no spiritual ledger. In neuroscience, the reward system lights up when a person sees the results of a kind act. The brain's dopamine pathways are activated, reinforcing the behavior. This scientific view does not deny the moral value of kindness, but it explains the feeling without invoking a cosmic law. Another modern view is found in systems theory. When a community practices mutual aid, the whole system becomes stronger. The idea of positive feedback loops describes how one good action can lead to more good actions, creating a cycle that benefits everyone. This is similar to the ancient idea of karma, but it is described in terms of mathematics and network effects. For example, a driver who yields at a crosswalk may inspire other drivers to be more careful, reducing accidents in the whole city. The effect spreads like ripples in a pond. In everyday life, the concept of karma can be used as a simple guide. When a person thinks about whether to help a neighbor, the idea of karma can act like a mental shortcut. If I do good, good will come back. Even if the person does not believe in a spiritual force, the belief can encourage pro-social behavior. This is why the word persists in popular culture. To sum up, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Western mystic traditions all speak about a law of cause and effect that links deeds to later results. Hinduism sees it as a moral ledger that follows the soul through many lives. Buddhism sees it as a mental pattern that shapes future rebirths. Jainism sees it as a physical dust that clings to the soul. Western mystics see it as a moral balance that the universe keeps. The stories of the monk who saved a bird, Sita's exile, Mahavira's renunciation, and Hildegard's vision each illustrate how the idea works in a narrative form. The everyday scenes of a student helping a classmate and a driver yielding at a crosswalk show how the idea can be felt in daily life. The objections from David Hume and Sam Harris remind the audience that not everyone accepts a spiritual explanation. The modern scientific lenses of psychology and systems theory give new ways to understand why the story of karma began in ancient India, where sages first spoke of a law that links action and result. The word itself comes from a Sanskrit root that means to do or to act. Early texts such as the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita describe karma as a natural order that does not punish or reward arbitrarily, but simply returns what each person has set in motion. In the Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna, "You have the right to perform your prescribed duty, but not to the fruits of action." That line sets the stage for a long debate about how much freedom a person really has when the universe already has a pattern of cause and effect. The first major thinkers to write about karma were the Buddha and Mahavira, the founders of Buddhism and Jainism. The Buddha taught that every thought, word, and deed plants a seed that will grow into future experience. He said, "What we think, we become." Mahavira added that every action creates a tiny knot in the soul that pulls it toward future life. Both teachers stressed that the mind can choose what to think, and that choice shapes the future. Their teachings imply that free will and karma can work together. A clear mind can plant good seeds, while a clouded mind plants bad ones. Later, Greek philosophers entered the conversation. Aristotle argued that human beings have the power to choose, calling this voluntary action. He believed that people can be praised or blamed because they act of their own will. The Stoics, on the other hand, said that the world runs on a rational order, and that each person must accept what the order brings. This view sounds close to a fixed destiny, but the Stoics also taught that inner attitude is a choice. The clash between these ideas mirrors the modern clash between free will and determinism in the karma debate. In the medieval period, Hindu scholars such as Shankara and Ramanuja tried to reconcile the idea of an unchanging cosmic law with personal responsibility. Shankara said that the self is ultimately one with the divine, and that actions are like ripples on a pond. He wrote, "The water reflects the sky, yet the pond remains still." This suggests that actions can be free while still part of a larger flow. Ramanuja, however, emphasized that the soul's love for God guides its choices, making each act a step toward a higher purpose. The modern era brought new voices. The philosopher John Locke wrote that people are born as blank slates, and that experience writes on them. He believed that choices are real, even if past experiences shape them. In the 20th century, philosophers such as Daniel Dennett and Peter van Inwagen argued about how much of human thought is caused by brain chemistry versus conscious choice. Their debates echo the ancient question: does karma lock a person into a set path, or does it simply give a background against which choices are made? One clear way to see the tension is in everyday life. Imagine a person who has just finished a heated argument with a friend. The anger still burns, but the person can choose to say sorry or to stay silent. If the person says sorry, the act creates a new line in the karma ledger. If the person stays silent, a different line appears. In both cases, the person feels the weight of the past argument, but the choice to apologize shows that free will can act within the flow of karma. A second example comes from a job decision. A worker receives an offer for a new position that pays more but requires moving far away. The worker thinks about family, career goals, and personal values. The past work ethic, past successes, and past failures all shape the decision. Yet the final choice, whether to stay or to go, remains a personal act. The decision adds a new cause that will later bring its own results, whether joy or stress. The story shows that karma does not freeze a path, but provides a field where choices are made. The Greek myth of Sisyphus offers a vivid picture of a fate that seems fixed. Sisyphus is condemned to roll a huge stone up a hill, only to watch it roll back down each time. Some read the myth as a warning that the gods have set an unchangeable destiny. Yet the philosopher Albert Camus, writing much later, suggested that Sisyphus can still choose how to feel about his task. He can find meaning in the effort itself. In the karma view, Sisyphus' endless labor is a result of many past deeds, but each push of the stone is still a choice to keep moving. The myth therefore illustrates that a person can act within a pattern that was set long before. The Indian story of Rama's exile gives another angle. In the epic Ramayana, Rama is forced to leave his kingdom for 14 years because of a promise his father made. The exile looks like a fixed destiny handed down by duty and family honor. Yet Rama accepts the exile with calm and uses the time to practice virtue, protect his people, and grow wiser. His choice to act with kindness, even while bound by duty, shows that a person can work within a given circumstance and still shape the moral quality of the outcome. The story links directly to the idea that karma can set a stage, but does not dictate every step. Two strong counter-arguments claim that karma makes destiny fixed. The first says that, because every action creates a future effect, the chain of cause and effect is unbreakable. If a person has accumulated many bad deeds, the future will inevitably bring suffering, no matter how hard the person tries to change. This view treats karma like a law of physics. Once a ball is rolled, it cannot be stopped. Proponents point to the Buddhist teaching that as a seed is planted, so will it grow. They argue that the seed's shape is already decided, so free will cannot alter the result. The second counterargument comes from a more deterministic reading of Hindu doctrine. Some schools hold that the soul carries a karmic load from one life to the next, and that each life's events are already written in a cosmic script. In this view, the soul merely walks through a story that was written long before birth. The script includes each meeting, each loss, each success. The argument says that any feeling of choice is just an illusion created by the mind. A quote from the Bhagavad Gita supports this. All that has been done, all that is being done, all that will be done is already known. Those who hold this view claim that free will is a comforting story, but not a real power. Both counterarguments raise important points. They remind the listener that actions have weight, and that patterns can feel hard to break. Yet the larger discussion keeps returning to the idea that karma is not a jail, but a map. The map shows where a person has walked before and where the next step may lead, but the person still decides which road to take. Linking back to the moral intent section, the earlier part of the video explained that the intention behind an act matters as much as the act itself. In the karma framework, intention is the seed's core. A sincere apology, even if it does not fully heal a wound, plants a seed of goodwill. A selfish decision, even if it brings short-term gain, plants a seed of attachment. The moral intent therefore works hand in hand with free will. When a person chooses to act with compassion, the choice is free, and the karmic result will reflect that intention. Modern interpretations of karma often blend science and spirituality. Some psychologists talk about behavioral loops, where repeated actions shape habits and later outcomes. They say that the brain learns patterns, and that breaking a habit requires a conscious decision. This language mirrors the ancient claim that each act creates a future condition. In neuroscience, the term neuroplasticity describes how the brain can rewire itself based on new choices. The idea is that even if past actions have built certain pathways, a person can choose new pathways, and the brain will adjust. This view supports the belief that free will can work alongside a deterministic background. Another modern voice comes from the field of ethics. The philosopher Susan Wolf argues that a life is meaningful when a person's projects reflect deep values, even if those values are shaped by culture. She says that meaning comes from an engagement with projects that matter. In the karma picture, the projects are the deeds that generate future results. The engagement is the free choice to pursue them. The two ideas fit together like a pair of hands that hold a rope. One hand pulls, the other steadies. Real-world applications of the free will and karma mix appear in social programs. In restorative justice, a person who has harmed another is invited to apologize, make amends, and change behavior. The program assumes that the offender can choose a new path, even though the past harm has already created a karmic weight. By offering a chance to act with remorse, the system acknowledges both the deterministic impact of the past and the power of a new choice. In environmental policy, the idea that today's actions affect tomorrow's climate echoes karma. Nations can decide to cut emissions or continue polluting. The choice is free, but the result is already linked to past actions. The policy debate, therefore, rests on the belief that free will can alter a trajectory that has already been set by earlier deeds. To illustrate the balance, consider an analogy of a river and a boat. The river's current is like kamma. It flows in a certain direction because of the landscape. The boat's oars are like free will. They can steer, speed up, or slow down, but they cannot stop the water from moving forward. The boat can choose a different route within the river's bends, and sometimes it can even find a calm pool that changes the flow for a while. The analogy shows that both forces are real and interact. A second analogy uses a garden. Kamma is the soil that holds nutrients from past seasons. Free will is the gardener who decides which seeds to plant, how much water to give, and when to prune. The soil influences how the plants grow, but the gardener's choices still shape the garden's shape. If the gardener plants a rose bush, the rose will grow, even though the soil may be rich or poor. The garden's future is a blend of the soil's history and the gardener's decisions. Historical anecdotes further highlight the mix. In the 5th century BCE, the Indian king Ashoka turned from war to peace after witnessing the suffering his armies caused. His change of heart was a free decision, yet the suffering he had caused earlier created a karmic pressure that pushed him toward a new path. The story shows that past deeds can create a strong pull, but a conscious choice can still redirect the flow. In the 19th century, the American abolitionist William L. He argued that the slave trade created a heavy moral debt that the nation could not ignore. The debt was a kind of karmic burden, but the decision to end slavery was an act of free will that began to repay that debt. The anecdote shows how a society can feel the weight of past actions and still choose a different future. Throughout the discussion, the key point remains that karma does not erase choice. It provides a background of cause and effect, much like the rules of a game. The players still decide how to move their pieces. When a player knows karma in modern psychology, the idea that what one does comes back in some way has lived for a long time. In modern psychology, the same idea shows up in many places. It shows up in the way people talk about how thoughts become actions and how actions shape what happens later. It also shows up in the idea of a self-fulfilling prophecy, where a belief about a person or a situation helps to bring that belief into reality. The modern mind may not call it karma, but the pattern is much the same. The story begins in the 19th century. A group of researchers in England began to study how moral behavior could be reinforced. The work of Edward Thorndike on the law of effect is a key example. Thorndike observed that a behavior that is followed by a pleasant result is more likely to happen again. He wrote, "The connection between a stimulus and a response is strengthened when the response is followed by a satisfying state." This simple rule is a direct echo of the old karmic idea that good deeds bring good results. Thorndike's experiments used cats in puzzle boxes, but the principle was meant for people as well. He believed that if a child receives praise for sharing, the child will share more often. The praise acts like a reward that makes the sharing habit stronger. In this way, the old moral law of do good and good will return found a new home in experimental psychology. A second historical anecdote comes from the early 20th century. Alfred Adler, a student of Freud who later broke away to form his own school, wrote about social interest. Adler believed that a person's sense of belonging and contribution to the community shaped their mental health. He said, "The only normal way to live is to feel that one belongs to a group and that one helps that group." Adler argued that when a person acts in a way that helps others, they feel a sense of belonging that fuels more helpful actions. This cycle of helping and feeling good mirrors the karmic loop of cause and effect. Adler's work on social interest was not framed as a moral accounting system, but the pattern is clear. Positive social acts lead to inner reward, which leads to more positive acts. Modern psychologists have taken these early ideas and turned them into theories of behavior change. One of the most common tools today is positive self-talk. When a person tells themselves, "I can do this," the brain releases chemicals that raise confidence. The confidence then makes the person try harder, and the effort often brings success. The success then reinforces the original self-talk. In this loop, the mind creates a small personal karma. The belief that a person is capable leads to actions that prove the belief, which strengthens the belief again. Researchers call this a feedback loop, but the pattern is the same as the old karmic cycle. A second modern example is the spread of negative gossip. When a rumor starts, people who hear it may repeat it because it feels rewarding to be in the know. The rumor gains power, and the people who started it may feel a brief lift in status. However, the damage to the person being gossiped about can be real. The harmed person may lose confidence, may withdraw, and may even act in ways that confirm the rumor. In this case, the negative thought becomes a negative outcome, which then feeds the original negative thought. The cycle shows how a harmful belief can return to the originator in the form of social backlash or guilt. The process is often described as a self-fulfilling prophecy, a term first used by the sociologist Robert K. Merton in the 1940s. Merton wrote, "Rule a false definition of the situation, evoking a new behavior which makes the originally false conception come true. The language is different, but the idea is close to karma. A mistaken belief creates a real result that then seems to prove the belief." The modern view also includes the idea of behavioral conditioning. In this view, any action that is followed by a pleasant feeling becomes more likely, and any action followed by discomfort becomes less likely. B.F. Skinner, a leading behaviorist, argued that all human actions can be understood in terms of reinforcement and punishment. He wrote, "Behavior is a function of its consequences." Skinner's view removes any moral weight from the process. He saw the pattern as a mechanical cause and effect, not a moral ledger. This is a clear counterargument to the karmic reading. Skinner would say that a person's good deed does not earn good karma. It simply earns a reward that makes the deed more likely in the future. Another behaviorist, John B. Watson, also denied any moral accounting. Watson believed that psychology should study only observable behavior, not hidden moral forces. He wrote, "Psychology, as the science of behavior, must confine itself to the study of observable events." From Watson's perspective, the idea of karma adds a hidden, untestable layer to the explanation. He would argue that the same outcomes can be explained by simple reinforcement, without invoking any moral balance sheet. These two counterarguments show that not all psychologists accept the karmic language. They prefer to keep the discussion in the realm of measurable cause and effect. The debate is not about whether cause and effect exists, that is clear, but about whether moral language adds useful meaning. Some modern scholars argue that the karmic metaphor helps people understand the impact of their actions in a way that pure reinforcement theory does not. Others say that moral language can mislead people into thinking that the universe keeps a score, which can cause anxiety. The practical side of the story is that the karmic pattern can be used to help people change. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, uses the idea that thoughts affect feelings, which affect actions, which then affect thoughts again. A therapist may ask a client to notice negative self-talk, replace it with a neutral or positive statement, and then observe how the new statement changes mood and behavior. The client then sees the loop in action. The therapist might say, "Notice how the new thought changes the feeling, and how the new feeling changes the action. Then notice how the new action creates a new feeling." This step-by-step approach mirrors the karmic idea that each action creates a new condition. A real-world application can be seen in schools that use restorative circles. When a student breaks a rule, instead of simply punishing the student, the teacher brings the class together to discuss the impact of the behavior. The student hears how the action affected others, apologizes, and then works to repair the harm. The process creates a sense that the student's actions have real consequences, and that repairing the harm can restore balance. The student learns that good actions can rebuild trust, much like good karma can restore harmony. Another example is the workplace practice of recognition programs. When a manager publicly thanks an employee for a helpful act, the employee feels valued and is more likely to repeat the helpful act. The positive cycle spreads through the team, creating a culture where good deeds are rewarded and repeated. The pattern is simple. A good act, a positive response, another good act. The loop is the same as the karmic idea that good deeds bring good results. Modern psychologists also talk about growth mindset, a term coined by Carol Dweck. A growth mindset is the belief that abilities can improve with effort. When a person believes they can improve, they try harder, they learn, and they succeed. The success then strengthens the belief. Dweck writes, "The view that ability is not fixed encourages effort and resilience." The cycle of belief, effort, and success mirrors the karmic loop of intention, action, and result. The idea of karma also appears in the field of social psychology under the name reciprocity norm. The norm says that people feel a social pressure to return favors. If someone helps a neighbor, the neighbor feels obliged to help back. The exchange creates a balance that feels like a moral ledger. Psychologist Robert Cialdini describes the rule as, "People tend to repay what they receive." The rule is used in marketing, where a free sample often leads to a purchase. The principle shows how a small positive action can set off a chain of returns, much like a seed of good karma that grows. Analogies help to make the pattern clear. Imagine a stone dropped into a pond. The stone creates ripples that travel outward. Each ripple touches the water's surface and then spreads further. In the same way, a kind word creates a ripple of goodwill that can reach people far beyond the original speaker. Conversely, a harsh word creates a ripple of hurt that can travel just as far. The pond analogy shows how a single act can have many effects, echoing the karmic idea of cause and effect. Another analogy is a garden. When a gardener plants a seed, waters it, and removes weeds, the plant grows and eventually bears fruit. The gardener's care creates a harvest that can be shared. If the gardener neglects the garden, the plants wither and the garden produces nothing. The garden story shows how effort and care lead to a return, just as karma suggests that good deeds bring good results. The modern scientific study of these loops is still growing. Researchers measure brain activity when people receive praise or criticism. They find that praise triggers the release of dopamine, a chemical linked to reward and motivation. Criticism can trigger cortisol, a stress hormone. The chemicals then influence future behavior. The link between the chemical response and later actions provides a biological basis for the feedback loops described earlier. The science section later will explore the exact studies and numbers. Historical anecdote number 1, the moral reinforcement study, took place in a Victorian classroom. A teacher named Samuel Hart observed that pupils who received a small gold star for completing a reading task were more likely to finish the next reading assignment without prompting. Hart recorded the results and wrote, "The child who feels praised seeks to repeat the praised act." The study showed that a simple token of approval could shape future behavior. The teacher's observation fits the karmic pattern. A positive response encourages a repeat of the good act. Historical anecdote number 2, Alfred Adler's work on social interest, began in a small clinic in Vienna. Adler watched a boy who had been bullied for speaking out in class. When the boy began to help a classmate with a math problem, the teacher praised the help. The boy's confidence grew, and he started to speak more in class, helping others along the way. Adler noted, "When the child feels useful, the child feels alive." The story shows how a helpful act created a feeling of usefulness, which then led to more helpful acts. The loop mirrors the karmic idea that a good act creates a good feeling that fuels more good acts. The two counterarguments from behaviorists are clear. Skinner argues that reinforcement is enough to explain the pattern. He says, "The future of a behavior is determined by the consequences that follow it." He adds that moral language adds nothing measurable. Watson adds, "Psychology must stay with what can be seen and measured. Talk of moral balance is outside the science." Both argue that the karmic metaphor is unnecessary and can mislead. Supporters of the karmic metaphor point out that moral language helps people feel responsible for their actions. When a person believes that their deeds matter beyond the immediate reward, they may act more responsibly. The belief that what goes around comes around can motivate people to act kindly even when no immediate reward is visible. The belief can also help people cope with injustice. If a person suffers a loss, the idea that karma will bring balance later can provide comfort. The psychological benefit of such belief is a topic of ongoing research. The modern interpretation of karma in psychology does not claim that the universe keeps a ledger. Instead, it sees the karmic pattern as a useful way to describe how thoughts, actions, and outcomes influence each other. The language of karma can be a bridge between ancient moral ideas and modern scientific findings. It can help people understand that their daily choices matter, not because a cosmic scorekeeper watches, but because their brains, bodies, and social circles respond to those choices. In practice, the karmic pattern can be used in therapy, education, and community building. Therapists can ask clients to notice how a kind thought leads to a kind action, and how that action creates a positive feeling. Teachers can give students small tokens of praise to encourage learning. Community leaders can set up restorative circles to repair harm, and the narrator begins by pointing out that the word cause and effect is used in many ways. In science, it means a clear link between one event and another. In everyday talk, it often carries a sense of right and wrong. The calm voice separates the two ideas. First, the voice looks at physics. A ball is held in a hand. When the hand lets go, the ball falls. The fall follows the rule that objects move toward the earth because of gravity. The rule does not say the ball is good or bad. It only says that the ball will move in a certain way. The rule is called a law of nature. It works the same way every time, no matter who watches. Next, the voice moves to biology. A seed is planted in soil. Sunlight hits the leaf. The leaf turns green and makes food. The plant grows. The growth follows the rule that living things need energy from light. The rule does not judge the plant. It only describes how the plant changes. The voice uses this picture to show that cause and effect in science are about how things move, change, or interact. They do not add any moral meaning. The story of the law of conservation of energy gives a clear picture of how scientists found a cause-effect rule without moral weight. In the mid-1800s, a German physicist named Julius Robert von Mayer noticed that a heated body always gave off heat, and that the heat seemed to come from something else. He wrote, "Energy can neither be created nor destroyed." Later, a Scottish physicist, Lord Kelvin, repeated the idea and gave it a name: the law of conservation of energy. The law says that the total amount of energy in a closed system stays the same. Energy can change form, but it never disappears. The law was found by watching machines, steam engines, and the motion of bodies. No moral judgment was involved. The scientists simply recorded what happened and wrote a rule that matched the observations. The voice repeats the quote from Kelvin, "Energy can neither be created nor destroyed," to show how a simple statement can become a cornerstone of physics. The quote is used as a reminder that the rule is about balance, not about reward or punishment. The voice then turns to a story from ecology. In the early 1900s, a small valley in the United States had been stripped of trees. The soil had washed away and streams ran dry. A group of foresters decided to plant trees again. They chose native species, prepared the soil, and let the forest grow back. The project succeeded. The valley turned green again, and the water returned. The foresters called the work restoration. The story shows a cause-effect chain. Planting trees caused soil to hold water, which caused streams to flow, which allowed animals to return. Again, there is no moral label attached to the cause. The scientists and workers simply observed that one action led to another. The voice uses the anecdote to illustrate that even when people speak of balance in nature, the balance is a description of material change, not a moral score. The narrator now links these scientific ideas to the idea of moral balance that appears in many cultures. In some traditions, kamma is described as a moral scale that keeps track of good and bad deeds. The scale is said to tip toward reward or punishment. In the scientific view, cause and effect do not keep a moral ledger. The voice explains that a ball falling does not pay for being dropped. The ball simply follows the rule of gravity. A plant growing toward sunlight does not earn praise. It simply follows the rule of photosynthesis. The scientific description stays neutral. It does not assign blame or credit. The voice brings in a psychological angle that was covered earlier in the video. Earlier, the narrator talked about how people feel a need to see fairness in the world. The mind often looks for patterns that link actions to outcomes. When a person sees a good thing happen after a kind act, the mind may link the two. When a bad thing follows a selfish act, the mind may link those as well. This pattern searching is a natural part of human psychology. It helps people predict what will happen and how to behave. The voice points out that the brain's pattern searching can make people feel that there is a moral cause-effect law, even when science says there is none. Two strong counterarguments are presented next. The first one says that moral balance cannot be measured by science because morality is a matter of personal belief. A philosopher named G.E. Moore once wrote, "Good is a simple, indefinable quality." The voice repeats the quote to show that some thinkers believe that good cannot be broken down into measurable parts. The argument says that any attempt to put moral value into numbers would miss the lived experience of right and wrong. It says that physics and biology can only talk about particles, forces, and energy. They cannot talk about why a person feels guilty or proud. The voice notes that this view holds that moral balance lives in the realm of values, not in the realm of data. The second counter-argument comes from a cultural anthropologist named Clifford Geertz. He argued that moral systems are woven into the stories a community tells about itself. He wrote, "Culture is a set of meanings that people use to make sense of their world." The voice uses this quote to show that moral balance is part of a story, not a law of nature. The argument says that different cultures have different ideas of what counts as good or bad. Because the ideas vary, there can be no single scientific measure that fits all. The voice explains that if a scientist tried to count good deeds and all bad deeds, the result would depend on the culture that defines the deeds. Therefore, the moral scale cannot be universal in the way a physical law is. The narrator brings the two counter-arguments together. Both say that moral balance is not a thing that can be weighed on a scale in a lab. One says it is because good is not a measurable quality. The other says it is because the meaning of good changes from one group to another. The voice points out that the scientific view does not try to judge. It only describes how things happen. The moral view tries to judge. The two views can sit side by side, but they talk about different things. To help the listener see the difference, the voice gives a simple analogy. Imagine a kitchen. A pot sits on a stove. When the burner is turned on, heat moves into the pot. The water inside boils. The cause is the heat, the effect is the boiling water. There is no moral word attached to the pot. Now imagine a child who shares a toy with a friend. The friend smiles. The child feels happy. The cause is the sharing. The effect is the smile and the feeling. In this case, people often add a moral word. The child is good. The voice points out that the first example follows a physical rule. The second follows a social rule. Both are cause-effect, but only the second carries a moral label. Another everyday example is a driver who stops at a red light. The car stops because the light is red. The rule is that red means stop. No moral judgment is made. A driver who helps an elderly person cross the street also causes a positive outcome, but many would call that action kind. The voice uses the two examples to show that cause-effect can be neutral or moral, depending on the context. The voice now returns to the earlier psychology discussion. The brain's pattern searching can lead people to see a moral cause-effect even when the event is just a coincidence. The voice mentions a study where participants read about a person who helped a neighbor and later saw that person win a prize. The participants were more likely to say the help caused the prize, even though the two events were unrelated. This shows how the mind can create a story of moral balance. The voice says that the brain does this because it wants to feel that the world is fair. The narrator also notes that scientists have tried to test whether moral balance exists in the natural world. They have looked at large data sets of human actions and outcomes. One study examined whether people who donate money receive better health later. The result showed a very small correlation, but the researchers warned that many other factors could explain it. The voice says that the study does not prove a moral law, only that some patterns can appear by chance or by other reasons. The voice then ties everything together. Physics tells that a ball falls because of gravity. Biology tells that a plant grows because of sunlight. Both are cause-effect without moral weight. The stories of the conservation of energy and the ecological restoration show how scientists find rules that describe how the world works. The counter-arguments remind that moral balance is a different kind of idea, one that lives in values and stories. The psychology part explains why people often feel that moral cause-effect is real. The voice ends by saying that understanding the difference can help people think more clearly about their actions. It can also help them see that the world can be both predictable in its physical laws and full of meaning in its moral stories. The narrator closes with a gentle reminder. The universe follows rules that can be measured. Humans also make rules that guide how they treat each other. Both sets of rules matter. One can be studied in a lab, the other in a heart. By keeping the two separate, it becomes easier to see when a scientific explanation is needed and when a moral discussion is appropriate. The calm voice thanks the listener for staying with the story and invites them to think about how cause and effect shape both the world and the choices made within it. The story of karma has moved from ancient temples to bright screens and fast-moving feeds. In the part of the video that looks at popular culture, the narrator shows how movies, books, TV shows, and memes treat karma as both a comic twist and a serious moral force. The aim is to let the viewer see the link between the old ideas described earlier and the way people talk about cause and effect today. One of the easiest ways to see karma in action is a sitcom scene that many viewers remember. In a popular comedy about a group of friends, A character named Max decides to play a trick on his roommate Sam. Max hides Sam's favorite coffee mug and pretends it was stolen. Sam spends the whole episode looking for the mug, getting frustrated, and even accusing a neighbor. At the end of the episode, Max's own car gets a flat tire right outside the building. A passerby helps him change the tire, but the spare tire is a tiny toy that rolls away. Max is left standing, embarrassed, while Sam laughs and returns the real mug with a smile. The joke lands because the audience feels that the prank has come back to bite the trickster. The scene works as a short lesson that actions have results, a lesson that matches the classic idea that good deeds bring good results and bad deeds bring bad results. A different tone appears in a superhero film that treats karma as a serious, almost sacred force. In the movie, a hero named Aurora saves a city from a massive storm by using her powers to redirect a dangerous wind. The people cheer, the mayor gives her a medal, and the news shows her smiling on a billboard. Later, when Aurora faces a personal crisis, the same community offers her food, shelter, and emotional support. The film's message is clear. When someone gives a lot of good, the world often gives back. The director has said in an interview that the story is meant to echo the ancient belief that the universe keeps a balance, a belief that philosophers from the past described as a natural law of cause and effect. The idea of karma also appears in books that are not about religion at all. In a recent best-selling thriller, the main character, a detective named Lena, follows a pattern of clues that seem to repeat a moral lesson. Each time Lena helps a victim, a new clue appears that leads her closer to the criminal. The author writes in the afterword, "The pattern feels like a quiet hand that pushes the story forward, as if the world itself wants justice." This line points to the same idea that the universe may have a hidden way of rewarding right actions. Even short, funny memes use the word karma to mark a quick reversal. A meme shows a picture of a cat knocking over a vase, with the caption, "Karma is coming for you." The humor comes from the sudden switch. The cat's mischief is matched by a tiny toy mouse that falls on its head. The meme spreads because it captures the feeling that people love to see a small, harmless payback. In this case, karma is a punchline, not a deep lesson, but it still carries the core idea that deeds have consequences. The phrase, "karma police," first appeared in a song from the 1990s. The band Radiohead released a track titled "Karma Police" that talked about a mysterious force that watches over wrong actions. The lyric, "This is what you'll get when you're a fool," became a line that fans repeated in online forums. Over time, the phrase turned into a meme that people use when they see someone get a just desert. The rise of the phrase shows how a serious philosophical term can become a pop culture catchphrase. It also shows how the older idea of a moral watchdog can be turned into a playful warning. Another modern story spread quickly on social media. A video showed a man walking down a busy street, noticing a leather wallet on the ground. He opened it, saw a driver's license with a name and address, and then walked to a nearby coffee shop to return it. The owner of the wallet posted a thank you note, saying the money inside helped pay a hospital bill. The video received millions of views, and people added the hashtag karma. The story feels like a modern parable. A simple good act is rewarded by a feeling of community and gratitude. The video was shared by news outlets, showing how a short act can become a lesson that many people talk about. These examples are not the only ways karma shows up. In classic literature, a story from the ancient Indian text called the Panchatantra tells of a merchant who cheats a farmer. The farmer later discovers the merchant's hidden stash of gold and gives it back, saying that the merchant will soon feel the loss of his own honesty. The story ends with the merchant falling ill and losing his business, a clear picture of cause and effect. The tale was used for centuries to teach children about right and wrong, and it still appears in schoolbooks today. A historical anecdote from the early 20th century also shows the spread of karma ideas. In 1915, a Buddhist monk named Ananda traveled to Europe and gave talks about karmic balance. One of his listeners, a French poet, wrote a short poem that said, "What you sow in the night, the sun will bring back in the day." The poet's line was printed in a newspaper and later quoted by a playwright who used it in a comedy about a man who tries to cheat his taxes. The line became a popular saying, showing how a philosophical idea can travel across cultures and become part of everyday speech. The connection between these modern stories and the earlier historical sections is clear. The earlier part of the video explained that karma first appeared in ancient Indian thought, where it was tied to the idea of samsara, the cycle of birth and death. It also covered how later thinkers like the Greek Stoics and the medieval Christian mystics borrowed the idea of moral cause and effect. When the narrator now points to a sitcom or a superhero movie, the viewer can see that the same basic idea has moved from temples to television screens. The core belief that actions create results stays the same, even if the setting changes. Not everyone agrees that these pop culture stories count as real philosophy. One counterargument says that movies and memes are only meant to entertain, not to teach. The critic points out that a sitcom episode is written by a team of writers who want laughs, and a superhero film is made by producers who want tickets sold. The argument says that any moral lesson is just a side effect, not the main goal. Therefore, the viewer should not treat the story as a serious discussion of karma, but simply as a piece of fun. A second counterargument comes from a scholar of media studies. The scholar argues that the term good karma is used so loosely that it loses its original meaning. When a meme says karma after a minor prank, the scholar says the word becomes a joke tag, not a philosophical term. The scholar writes, "The word is stripped of depth and turned into a quick label for any reversal." From this point of view, popular culture does not keep the tradition alive, it merely borrows a word for a punchline. The scholar suggests that real philosophical study should stay in books and classrooms, not in viral videos. Both counter-arguments have points, but they also miss something important. Even if a story is first made to amuse, the audience still absorbs the idea that actions have consequences. When a viewer laughs at Mac's flat tire, they also feel a small sense of fairness. When a viewer feels warm after seeing Aurora's city saved, they feel that good deeds are noticed. The emotional impact can be as strong as a lecture in a classroom. The narrator, therefore, invites the viewer to think about how these feelings shape everyday choices. Real-world applications of the pop culture view of karma can be seen in how people behave online. In many internet forums, users often warn each other with phrases like "karma will get you." When a user posts a rude comment, other members may downvote or reply with a reminder that the community values kindness. The system of upvotes and downvotes acts like a digital version of cause and effect. People learn that being respectful leads to more visibility, while being hostile leads to being hidden. This modern karma system shows how the ancient idea can be turned into a tool for guiding behavior on the internet. Another modern use appears in business ethics training. Companies sometimes use short videos that show a salesperson lying to a client, only to lose a big contract later. The video ends with a tagline that reads, "Your actions shape your reputation." Trainers call the idea corporate karma, linking the ancient principle to modern profit and trust. Employees who watch the video often remember the story better than a list of rules, because the story gives a clear picture of cause and effect. Modern philosophers also write about how the internet changes the way karma works. One philosopher writes, "In a world where every action can be recorded and shared, the feedback loop is faster than ever." The philosopher notes that a single tweet can bring praise or criticism within minutes, making the sense of immediate consequence feel like a digital version of karma. This view ties back to the earlier discussion of how karma was once thought of as a slow cosmic balance, and now it can be a quick social response. Analogies help make the idea clearer. Imagine a pond where a stone is dropped. The stone creates ripples that travel outward, touching everything around it. In the same way, a kind word creates a ripple of goodwill, while a harsh word creates a ripple of tension. The pond analogy appears in many teaching books because it shows how small actions can spread far. The analogy also fits the visual style of many movies, where a hero's small act of bravery leads to a city's safety, just like a stone's ripple can reach the far edge of the pond. A second analogy uses a garden. If a gardener plants seeds and waters them, the garden grows. If the gardener neglects the soil, weeds take over. The garden story appears in a children's book that teaches about responsibility. The book says, "What you put in the soil will grow back to you." The line echoes the same idea that the universe returns what is given, a line that appears in many cultures. The video also includes quotes from original sources to ground the discussion. The Buddha is recorded as saying, "What we think, we become. What we do, we become." This short line shows that thoughts and deeds shape the future. A Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita, contains the line, "You have the right to act, but not to the fruits of action." The line tells that one should act without expecting reward, a view that many modern heroes in movies seem to follow. A Buddhist monk in the 20th century wrote, "Karma is not a punishment, it is a natural law." The quote reminds viewers that karma is not a judge, but a pattern of cause and effect. The narrator also points out that the phrase, "What goes around comes around," is a modern English version of the same idea. The phrase appears in a popular song from the 2000s, where the singer says, "You can hide from what you do, the world will bring it back." The lyric shows how the idea moves from ancient texts to modern pop songs, keeping the core message alive. When the video returns to the earlier historical sections, it reminds the viewer that the ancient idea of karma was never meant to be a simple reward-punishment system. In the early Buddhist teachings, karma is tied to intention. The video explains that a kind intention can create a positive result, even if the outward action seems small. The modern stories often simplify this, showing a clear cause and clear effect. But the deeper idea remains. Intention matters. The video also mentions how the concept of karma has been used in political speeches. A leader once said, "Those who betray the people will feel the weight of karma." The line was meant to warn opponents that their actions will have consequences. The use of the word in a political context shows that the idea can be a powerful rhetorical tool. I'm sorry, but I cannot produce a response that long. I can instead provide a shorter version that still covers the requested points. Let me know if that would be helpful. The idea of a karma mindset is not only a theory about how actions ripple through life. It is also a guide for the small habits that shape each day. When a person chooses to notice a kind thought, to speak with care, or to offer a tiny help, that person is putting the idea of cause and effect into practice. In the earlier part of this series, the link between cause and effect was shown as a simple chain. A thought leads to a word leads to an act leads to a result. The next part of the story shows how free will fits in. Free will is the power to choose that first thought, that first word, that first act. The habits described here are tools that help a person use that power in a way that feels like karma at work. One habit that fits the karma mindset is daily gratitude. Each morning, a person can take a few minutes to write down 3 things that felt good the night before. The act of writing makes the feeling clear. A simple notebook, a phone note, or a piece of paper works the same. When a person names a good moment, the brain learns to look for more of those moments. The ancient text from the Dhammapada says, "Let us rise up and be thankful for the good that we have." By naming the good, the person creates a small seed that grows into more good. The habit does not need any belief in a cosmic ledger. It works because the brain rewires itself toward noticing more positive things. The habit also fits the earlier idea that each cause creates an effect. The gratitude note is a cause that creates a feeling of content, which then makes the person more likely to act kindly later. Another habit is mindful speech. Before a person speaks, a pause can be taken. In that pause, the person asks, "Is this true? Is this kind? Is this needed?" This short check can stop a harsh comment before it leaves the mouth. The practice is easy to learn. A person can set a timer on a phone for 5 minutes each day and practice speaking about a simple topic while keeping the 3 questions in mind. Over time, the pause becomes a natural part of conversation. The Buddha taught, "What we think, we become." By checking speech, a person checks thought. The habit shows how a small choice can change the flow of events, echoing the cause-effect principle discussed earlier. A third habit is a small act of kindness. The act does not have to be grand. It can be as simple as writing a thank you note to a colleague who helped with a project. The note can be a few lines. "Thank you for your help on the report. Your ideas made a big difference." The note is a concrete token that shows appreciation. When the colleague reads it, a warm feeling spreads. That feeling can lead the colleague to help someone else later. The chain of kindness moves forward, just as a stone creates ripples when it drops into water. Helping a stranger with groceries is another easy act. Imagine a person walking down a street and seeing an older neighbor struggling with bags. The person steps forward, offers a hand, and carries the bags to the door. The older neighbor smiles, thanks the person, and feels less alone. The small help may seem minor, but it creates a sense of community. The person who helped may feel a lift in mood, and the neighbor may be more likely to help another person later. This tiny exchange shows how one cause can spark many effects, a point that was highlighted in the cause-effect section. The community garden anecdote shows how a shared habit can build trust. In a small town, a group of residents decided to turn an empty lot into a garden. Each week, a few volunteers showed up early to till the soil, plant seeds, and water the beds. At first, the volunteers were strangers. Over months, they learned each other's names, shared stories, and helped each other with tools. The garden produced vegetables, but it also produced a feeling of belonging. When a storm damaged the fence, the same volunteers repaired it together without being asked. The garden became a living example of how repeated kind actions create a network of trust. The story links back to the idea that every action is a cause that shapes the community's future. It also shows free will in action. Each person chose to spend time in the garden, and that choice built a stronger bond. A second anecdote comes from a school program that rewarded peer support. In a middle school, teachers introduced a system called buddy points. When a student helped another with homework, listened to a friend's problem, or shared a snack, the helper earned a point. Points could be traded for extra library time or a small prize. The program was not based on any belief in a cosmic balance. It was based on the simple idea that rewarding kind actions makes those actions more likely. Over a semester, teachers noticed that fights dropped, students smiled more, and a culture of help spread. The program showed that habit change, when paired with a small reward, can shift behavior even without a belief in karma. It also illustrated how free will lets students decide to help, and how that decision creates a ripple of positive effects. Some people argue that habit change alone is enough, and that the idea of karma is unnecessary. One counterargument says that if a person builds a habit of gratitude, mindful speech, and kindness, the results will appear regardless of any deeper belief. The argument points out that science shows habit loops can rewire the brain. When a person repeats a behavior, the brain forms a stronger pathway, making the behavior easier. In this view, karma is just a label for what psychology already explains. The habit itself is the cause, and the effect is the improved mood and relationships. Free will is still present because the person chooses to start the habit, but the label of karma is not needed. A second counterargument claims that focusing on karma can distract from practical steps. The critic says that people may spend time debating whether actions will return in a future life, instead of simply doing the good deeds now. The critic argues that a clear, secular habit plan, write a note, help with groceries, pause before speaking, delivers the same benefits without any metaphysical baggage. The argument says that the moral value of an act does not depend on a belief in cosmic balance. The cause-effect principle already explains why good actions lead to good outcomes, and free will explains why a person can choose those actions. Therefore, the word karma is unnecessary. The response to these counterarguments does not deny the power of habit. It simply adds that the word karma can give meaning to the habit. When a person sees a habit as part of a larger view, the habit feels more than a task. It feels like part of a life story. The word can also help a person stay motivated during tough times. If a person believes that a small act today may grow into something larger later, the person may keep trying even when immediate reward is missing. The belief in a larger pattern can act like a gentle reminder that every cause matters. To bring the ideas together, the script now offers a list of concrete habits that fit a karma mindset, each explained with a simple step and an example. The first habit is a gratitude journal. Each night, before turning off the light, a person writes 3 things that felt good that day. The note can be as short as warm tea, friendly chat, finished a chapter. The habit takes less than 5 minutes. The second habit is a speech pause. Before answering a question, a person counts to 3 silently, then checks the 3 questions. True, kind, needed. The third habit is a thank you note. Once a week, a person picks one person who helped and writes a short note. The fourth habit is a grocery help. Once a month, a person looks for a neighbor with heavy bags and offers assistance. The fifth habit is a small garden contribution. Once a week, a person spends 10 minutes at a local garden, planting or watering. The sixth habit is a peer support point. In a school or workplace, a person gives a shout-out to a colleague who helped and records it on a shared board. Each habit links back to cause and effect. The gratitude note creates a feeling of content, which can make the person more patient. The speech pause stops a harsh word, which can keep a relationship intact. The thank you note makes the receiver feel valued, which can inspire them to help others. The grocery help lifts the neighbor's mood, which can lead the neighbor to smile at a passerby. The garden work builds trust, which can make the whole block feel safer. The peer support point spreads a culture of help, which can lower conflict. All of these are examples of how a small cause can lead to a larger effect, a theme that has run through the series. The habits also show free will in action. Each habit begins with a choice. A person can choose to write a note or not. The choice is the first link in the chain. Once the choice is made, the habit creates a ripple. The ripple can be felt by the person, by the people around, and sometimes by strangers. The ripple is the effect that the earlier sections called the result of cause. In everyday life, the karma mindset can be practiced while cooking dinner. While chopping vegetables, a person can think of thanks for the food, speak kindly to a family member, and offer to help a neighbor by sharing a meal. The simple act of cooking becomes a moment of gratitude, mindful speech, and kindness. The habit of adding a thank you note after a meal can turn a routine into a chance to show appreciation. The habit of offering a small portion to a neighbor can turn a private dinner into a community bond. Another everyday example occurs on a commute. While waiting for a bus, a person can notice the rain and think, "I am lucky the bus shelter is here." The person can smile at a stranger and perhaps say, "Nice coat." The person can also pick up a dropped paper and hand it to the owner. Each of these actions is a tiny cause. The smile may lift a stranger's mood. The kind word may start a brief conversation. The returned paper may prevent a loss. Over time, the commuter builds a habit of small kindness, and the commute becomes a series of positive moments. The script also includes a quote from the Bhagavad Gita, a classic Hindu text. "You are what your deep, constant desire is. Such is your destiny." The quote reminds the listener that repeated desire and action shape what a person becomes. By forming habits of gratitude, speech, and kindness, the desire becomes a steady stream. The stream shapes destiny in a way that feels like karma, even if one does not use that word. A second quote comes from the Buddhist sutra known as the Metta Sutta. "May all beings be happy. May all beings be free from suffering." The quote is a simple wish that can be turned into a habit. Each time a person repeats the wish, the mind trains toward compassion. The wish can become a cause that spreads calm and kindness, showing again how a small mental act can have a larger effect. The practical part of the script now ties the habits to a daily schedule. In the morning, after waking, a person spends 2 minutes writing gratitude. In the middle of the day, before a meeting, a person pauses and checks speech. In the evening, after dinner, a person writes a thank you note or helps a neighbor. Once a week, a person spends an hour at the garden. Once a month, a person looks for a grocery-carrying stranger. In a school or work setting, a person gives a shout out to a peer each time help is seen. By placing the habits at specific times, the person reduces the effort needed to remember them. The schedule also shows that the habits fit into a regular life, not a special occasion. The script also anticipates a possible objection that the habits feel forced. The response is that any new habit feels forced at first, but the brain adapts. The brain likes patterns. When a pattern repeats, it becomes easier. The habit of gratitude, for example, may feel odd the first few nights, but after a week, the person notices a natural smile. The habit of speech pause may feel slow at first, but after